Hey everybody, Big Lair here. Thought I would make a coffee talk video. I've been kind of busy the last few weeks. I haven't made any coffee talk videos and I feel bad about that. But I've got some free time today, so I thought I would talk about something that I've been thinking about for a long time. And with today being January 2nd, I think this is a good topic to bring up. I mentioned in a earlier video today, a different video on cryptos, about people talking about New Year's resolutions and whatnot. And I'm not really a New Year's resolution guy. But one thing you start thinking about during the new year is what's going to happen this year. And you also reflect upon what happened last year. Now, I've got 3 kids, 3 boys. My oldest son is 18. And so, here in Japan, society does not consider someone an adult until they reach the age of 20. So that's different than America. In America, we think when you turn 18, you're an adult, you're on your own, you're responsible for everything. Here in Japan, it's 20. The age is 20, which is interesting, huh? I think they're on the right track, though, because in my opinion, Japanese people are mentally younger than Westerners are. And that just has to do with how society treats people and what happens when you go through the school system here. But mostly it has to do with society. Society in Japan really holds your hand. They really hold your hand. They baby you for a number of years. And if you've ever, if anyone has ever lived in Japan for a number of years, you probably understand this already, or you've seen it. But for those of you who haven't, Japanese mentally are very young. If you meet someone, I would say most adults that I've met probably are at a mental age of around 14 years old. And now some people would get upset with that. However, during World War II, the U.S. military was confronted with having to fight against Japan. And they didn't know much about Japan. They wanted to know how to deal with Japan. So they found a woman, I forget her name. She was like the resident expert on Japan. She had written a number of books about Japan. And she was considered the go-to person for Japan. And they asked her, what do you think? So she had lots of discussions with the military. And one of the things she said in her report to the military was that at this time, she said the average mental age of a Japanese person is 12 years old. If we look at it from a Western standpoint, a Caucasian standpoint, what would you call it? Anglo-European standpoint, I would say 12 years old. And they were surprised by this. Now, I forget when it was. There was about, I think, the 50th anniversary of the war being over. So this was like in the 1990s, before this lady passed away. They interviewed her again. I'm pretty sure it was the 50th anniversary. She was interviewed, and the person said to her, hey, in this report that you gave, you said the average age of a Japanese person was 12 years old. Did you really believe that? She said, well, of course I believed it. That's why I wrote it. And he said, well, do you still believe it? And she says, no, I don't. And the reporter kind of looks relieved, And he says, well, what age do you think they are now, mentally? She said, they're around 13, 14. They've grown up a bit. She was dead serious. And the reporter was sort of, what? He thought she was going to say, well, they're like everybody else. No. So that lady, who was the expert on Japan for a number of years, thought, okay, 13 to 14 years old, I'll give Japanese people 14 years old. And if someone would like to argue with me, then I would say, have you lived in Japan for 16 years? Do you speak the language fluently? Have you worked for Japanese companies where you have to speak Japanese every day? Oh, I've done all those things. So if you haven't, then I I would say you can't criticize my opinion until you've lived here at least 10 years. If you've lived in Japan for 10 years and you disagree with me, hey, I'm cool with you calling me on the carpet, and then explain why you think I'm wrong. I'd be fine with that. And maybe some Japanese person is watching this, and if a Japanese person is watching this and doesn't agree, tell me why you don't agree. Because I'm pretty sure I can give you arguments against anything you would say, because I already have an idea what you're going to say, because I've had this discussion with Japanese people before, and a number of Japanese people agree with me on this. So it's not that I'm bashing Japanese people. I'm not being negative. I'm just stating what I believe to be a fact. So in Japan, you're not considered an adult until you're 20. That's just how it is. Now, there are legislators, there are politicians who want to change that age to 18. And that has to do with economic reasons, I think. They realize that older people, the population, a big part of the population is older, and they feel like they need to get more younger people involved in these decisions. And I think they're doing it because they understand that people from the age of 18 to 20 are still mentally very, very young and immature, and they will not be able to make mature choices as far as politicians and politics are concerned. As voting for someone or voting for certain laws and whatnot. So I think the government wanting to lower the age, they don't have the best interest of the country at heart. They're doing this because they know these young people will be very easily manipulated into voting however the politicians want them to be. But that's a separate issue. So my oldest son is 18. So I've spent a lot of time since his birthday, which was in April. So for the last 8 months, I've been thinking about, geez, have I prepared my son well for life? How have I done? And so I think, when you prepare your kids for life, you've got a lot of things to think about. Number one, you should be teaching your kids how to stay physically fit. And that's going to be different for everybody, right? Like for me, since I was probably in my early teens, I realized I needed to do very intensive, hard physical exercise to feel good. And I'm still that way. And someone like my wife, who just, her exercise is just, making 3 meals a day for us, cleaning the house, and all the other stuff she does. She doesn't actually go to a gym. She doesn't exercise like I do. She does not set aside time and do aerobics or anything like that. Yoga, nothing. Weightlifting, nothing. And she looks great. She looks even better now than she did when I married her almost 20 years ago. And yet she almost never does any exercise. On the other hand, I have to exercise 3-4 times a week, really hard, just to feel like I'm, healthy and where I should be. So I understand that everyone's physical needs are different. So part of, preparing your kids for life, I would say you need to teach them about physical fitness and help them to find what they need to feel good and to feel healthy, right? So that's part of it. You should teach your kids how to cook. If you have kids who are early teenagers and they have no idea how to cook, I think you're doing them a big disservice, right? If we go back, one of the most successful teaching methods is the Montessori method, right? Maria Montessori. I won't go into, all of who she was and the whole method and everything, but she had this idea that when kids got to be a certain age, I think it was from like 9 to 12, from the ages of 9 to 12, if kids were able to do certain things, and one of them was cooking, simple cooking, it was a huge boost for their self-confidence, and it prepared them better for life than kids who had no experience with certain things, such as cooking, during that age period. So she thought that was really important, that age, to get kids in the mindset of, hey, I can cook for myself, I can do this for myself. And it had a very positive mental impact on their lives when they became adults. So I think you should teach your kids how to cook. Now, maybe you're not a very good cook. Oh boy, what to do then? Well, you better learn. Because these are your kids you're talking about, right? You want to prepare them. You don't want your kids going out into the world, getting their own apartment or their own house or whatever, and then they can't cook for themselves, because then they're going to eat probably, substandard food. You're going to be eating junk food, fast food, convenience store food. You don't want your kids out there going to a restaurant every day, 2-3 times a day. They're just going to burn through all their money. That's not good. And they're not going to be eating they're not going to get the nutrition they need, basically, right? So teach your kids how to cook. It'll make them feel good and give them confidence. And then it'll give you a little bit of peace of mind, knowing that when your kids get out into life, they'll already have this skill, a very important skill. Whenever I meet someone, okay, I'm 51 years old. So, it's kind of fun being 51 because I've got enough life experience. I can see when I meet people younger in their 20s and 30s and I talk to them, I can tell by the words they use where they're going to be in life, where they're going to get to in life in the next 5 to 10 years, just by the way they talk and the things they tell me. And when I meet people, especially women, who tell me they can't cook, I'm always surprised, and I like to joke with them. Well, you ever plan on getting married someday? Well, yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm planning to get married. Yes, I do plan to get married. And then I'll say, well, who's going to cook? Oh, my husband will cook. I said, well, what if your husband's like you? Doesn't know how to cook? And some people, have said to me in the past when I've asked it, they say, oh, that's kind of sexist. Why would you think because I'm a woman I should know how to cook? And I've said, well, number one, the fact that you're a woman doesn't mean anything in regards to cooking. I said, I have 3 kids and all 3 of my kids know how to cook. Why? Because I don't want them ever relying on a woman like you to cook for them. Sounds kind of harsh, but it's the truth, right? You don't want to put your kids in a position of weakness. If you have boys or girls and you're hoping that, they'll marry someone who knows how to cook, you're putting them in a position of weakness, because now their nutritional needs are in the hands of someone else. What if this other person is a dipshit who knows how to cook but doesn't think about, doesn't cook in such a way to balance out the nutrition? Right? You need someone who can cook but has a brain to go along with it, right? So you don't want your kids being put in a weak position to where they're relying on someone else to get their nutrition, because what you eat, it affects so many things, right? So teach your kids how to cook. If you have to, send them to a class. If you can't cook, find a cooking class. I don't know where people are in the world, but even in Japan here, which is an expensive country, I'm able to find cooking classes. Now, I've never been to one. My wife, interestingly enough, who's a fantastic cook, she sometimes goes to cooking classes just to learn something new. Maybe there's something she doesn't know. She'll pick up something. So I'm sure you can find cooking classes wherever you are. So if you don't know how to cook, find someone who does, and then take your kids with you. They will thank you in the future when they get older. My oldest son, who is 18, we started making him cook. We made him cook. I think he was 12 years old the first time I told him he had to make his own breakfast. And he was, oh, what, man? Wow, are you kidding me? He acted like I was a bad dad or something. And I said to him, if I don't teach you how to cook, I'm a bad dad. And so my wife and I slowly taught him how to cook, and now he's 18. And he pretty much cooks 3 meals a day for himself. And he is no slouch in the kitchen, let me tell you. He makes stuff that my wife and I don't even make. I mean, I've been baking since I was 9. I made my first batch of chocolate chip cookies when I was 9. I was making cakes not long after, and pies. And that sort of started my culinary journey. There's not a thing that I cannot make when it comes to food. And I was really surprised. My son would make these amazing, or has made in the past year, these amazing 3- and 4-course Italian meals for my family. And he's not cooking just for me, my wife, and himself and his 2 brothers. He also cooks for his grandma and his aunt, because we're all kind of in the house together at times. So he's, imagine this, that an 18-year-old kid, he's cooking for 7 people, planning out a 3-4 course meal. Pretty impressive, right? Well, I think back to that day when he was 12 years old, and I said to him when we were in Malaysia, okay, you got to start cooking your breakfast every day. I'm not doing it anymore. Your mom's not doing it anymore. And of course, for about a week or two, we made it with him. We showed him. I showed him a few times. My wife showed him a few times. And then from there, he just took off. You know, like that's simple stuff, right? Making eggs and bacon and whatnot. That's a no-brainer. Even a monkey could do it. But if you've never done it, it doesn't seem like it's easy, right? Okay, so teach your kids how to cook. The next thing, your kids have to know how to clean, right? They have to know how to like clean their room, make their bed, simple things like that, you know, their own hygiene, right? And let's see, my kids, I'm trying to think. So I've got 3 boys, 18, 15, and 10, soon to be 11. Oh, let's see. When did my kids start cleaning for themselves? About 9 years ago. 9 years ago. Yeah, nine years ago, I would say. My oldest son, so he was about, well, 9 then. And his brother, so I think when they all hit about the age of 7. So yeah, when they hit, but 9 is where I really remember it, because we were in Malaysia and we lived like in a 5-bedroom house with 6 bathrooms. So everybody had their own bedroom, everybody had their own bathroom. And that was where I said, okay, you got your own bedroom and bathroom, awesome. Now you're going to clean your own bedroom and bathroom. Okay, just your bedroom and bathroom. This is now your world. You have to keep your world ship-shape. And my kids did great with it. Even my youngest son, well, we didn't make him do anything when he was, 9 years ago. He was like 1. We didn't do that, but when he got to be, I think when he was about 6, we'd never said anything to him about cleaning his bathroom, but he just started cleaning it. And he actually had the cleanest bathroom of the 3 boys. And he was only 6. And his older brother at the time was, or the middle brother was, 10, and the other one was 14. He actually had the best looking bathroom, He was cleaning everything. Well, and he had seen me do it, and he knew where the cleaning supplies were and whatnot. So, yeah, make sure your kids are, get them to clean, to take care of their, keep their space tidy, good hygiene, make sure your kids are cleaning themselves when they take a shower. That kind of stuff. That's important too, right? Because when people get out on their own, you don't want your kids, number one, to, like I said, you don't want your kids moving out on their own, not being able to cook for themselves. And then you don't want them living in a pigsty, right? You want them to keep their place clean and to have this idea that clean is good, right? Cleanliness is next to godliness. That's a very interesting phrase, right? Even in Japan with the Shinto religion, they have a similar saying, similar expression to let people know how important it is to keep things clean. So you've got to teach your kid that. The next thing, I think you need to make sure your kids can read at a very high level, That's easy to do in, like America or Europe, I think. There's many chances, you have good libraries. If you can't afford books, there's always libraries, right? There's no excuse for your kids not being able to read at a very high level. And when I say a high level, I would say at a college level. High school level these days isn't such a big deal in my opinion. Try to get your kids reading at a college level. Newspapers in America, I don't know what the reading level is now, but years and years ago when I was a student, we'll say 30, 40 years ago, the reading level of newspapers was elementary school, grade 5. So that's about 11 years old. So if you were 11 years old, you should have been able to read the whole newspaper and comprehend it. Now, of course, because of lack of life experience at the age of 11, you might not have understood articles about politics, government, and finance, those kinds of things. But you should have been able to read the newspaper. So, my God, a 5th grade reading level is the level of newspapers. That's really low in my opinion. So I would say get your kids to be able to read at the highest level possible. That will really help them out in the future, because the next thing you want to teach your kids is to be able to learn by themselves. Teach them how to be self-learners. Well, part of being self-learning is knowing how to learn. What is the process of learning? What are the steps to learning? So you have to, number one, figure out what kind of learner is your kid. Do they learn best visually, Do they learn best through auditory means? Are they one of these kids that has to actually touch stuff, do things to learn, right? So there's all different kinds of learners. Figure out what works best for your kid, and then help them out. Say to them, hey, if you learn best this way, when you do this and that, do it this way. So you want to make sure your kids are self-learners. They're going to need that in life. You'll need that the rest of your life, how to learn new things, right? Society and what can we call it? The human race, I guess, would be a good way to put it. It's really changing, Our technologies are advancing. A lot of the jobs people did, 30 years ago, they're going by the wayside. If you have a manual labor job, what I would call not all manual labor is low skill, but manual labor and low skilled jobs, those are going by the wayside. Those are going to be replaced by AI or some kind of automation. Look at McDonald's. Now, I very rarely go to McDonald's, but once in a while I do. If I'm somewhere in Japan and I'm traveling on trains and it's time for me to eat lunch or dinner and I'm hungry and there's nothing else except a McDonald's around, guess what? I'm going to have a Big Mac. And I've heard it was this way in America before Japan, but now in Japan you walk up and you order. And years ago you'd order and you'd stand there and wait, and then they would bring your stuff to you, and there'd be a long line of people. Now, in some of the places, there's still a person there. They take your order, they give you like a receipt, and then you walk to a different place to get your food. And so that's a little different. But then now other places, it's all touchscreen. You walk in, there's a lady there saying, oh, please place your order. And I remember the first time I saw one of these self-service things, I said, place my order where? And she said, oh, on the computer screen. Now they've got you doing everything. So they don't even need someone now to take your order. You are giving the order. You're punching in the Big Mac set or whatever, the value meal that you're getting. You're paying right there, getting a receipt, and then you're shuffling down the production line to get your food, right? So even those kinds of jobs, what I would call low-skilled jobs, are being automated. And there's everything all the way up to lawyers. There's software out there now that can sift through, an unlimited number of legal books and do so in a matter of 5 to 10 minutes. Search through, you input, okay, we've got this case that deals with this law. What precedents were there, or what law applies to this case? Boom, you hit the search button. In 5 to 10 minutes, you've got about 2 months worth of reading sent to your computer. Whereas until recently, you might have a team of lawyers, junior partners or junior lawyers in a law firm, and they might spend a week, a couple weeks researching all this information. And now, there's a piece of software that'll gather all that information in 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, giving you all of the relevant laws and relevant precedents that you can use to present your case. Well, guess what? Don't need lawyers anymore. We just need someone to operate the computer, and now someone to walk into court with the information. So even a highly skilled job like a lawyer, which requires a huge amount of education and you need to invest a lot of time into studying, and to actually, once you become a lawyer, you're not just sitting back doing nothing. You're doing a lot of time reading things, creating arguments for your court case. It's a highly skilled job, in my opinion. Those are going by the wayside. So it's not like it was years ago. Our kids, and if you have grandkids, same thing, right? they're growing up in a world where they may change jobs every several years, and not only change jobs in a certain field, they may be changing the field they work in completely to something different every several years or every 5 years. Think about it. Cliff High, one of my heroes, he talks about, space. We're going to go into space in a number of years, right? We will move into space, and that will create all kinds of new jobs, and it'll completely change our society, right? So I would imagine once our civilization is able to get into space even a little bit, oh man, that's going to change things tremendously, just tremendously. We'll have even more automation in our lives, more AI doing things for us, and there'll be new opportunities for employment, for your career. But guess what? You're going to have to be able to learn on your own these new things. You may have to learn on the fly. I would imagine if you're in space, there's going to be a lot of things you will need to work out yourself. So get your kids to a high level of reading and teach them how to be a self-learner. It will always help them. Okay, let's see. What else here? I had a list of things I wanted to talk about that I think kids need to learn that they may not learn. The parents, may not tell them, but they really have to. The next thing would be money. You make sure your kids understand money, they understand interest, and they understand saving. They really need to understand money, It would be good if they understood the creation of money, especially in America, because we've got a goofy system with the Federal Reserve. We do not print our own money, which creates all kinds of other complications and problems, which I won't go into in this video. But kids should understand money and interest. Interest if you use interest correctly, it'll really help you increase your wealth. If you don't understand interest, you will lose all of your wealth. You will lose all of your money if you do not understand interest. I think Einstein mentioned something about one of the greatest wonders of the world is compound interest. So, make sure your kids understand that. Okay, let's see. And then next, we were just talking about jobs, kids being able to read at a high level and being self-learners. Make sure your kids understand all options for getting a job. Don't let your kids get pigeonholed into some job like, because everyone in this area works in the factory or everyone's a firefighter, that's what you're going to do, right? Don't do that with your kids. Don't do that with your kids. Give them, make sure they understand all the options. When I was growing up, I did not understand all the options. No one told me all the options. Now, maybe if I had gone to the school counselor and said, hey, what are all my options? Someone like that might have told me, but I never did for whatever reason, right? There's lots of options out there in life, right? And tied with that is you have to help your kids find out what is their passion. What do they want to do? So many times I've heard people say, hey, because I want to move to America, right? My goal for 2020 is to move back to America with my wife and kids, just waiting on my wife's visa. Anyway, I've heard people say to me, hey, this place is hiring, that place is hiring, you should apply. And it's really interesting because everyone tells me what company is hiring, but no one has said to me, what do you want to do? What's your passion? What do you really want to do for a job? No one has said that to me, which I find really interesting. So you've got to help your kids find a passion. I would never tell someone to take a job that they didn't want to do. Now, it's one thing if you're down and out and you have no money and you're homeless. Okay, I think you need to just take whatever you can to put food on the table and put a roof over your head. That's a little different situation, right? But for most people who are not in a homeless situation, I would say, take the job if you think you're going to really like it. You can be passionate about it, because when you're passionate about things, you'll perform very well, right? You'll actually add value to what you're doing. So if you don't like it or you're not interested in it, don't do it. I've had so many people tell me, trying to think of what place I've heard a lot about. Oh, in Wisconsin, there's this factory. They're making the factory. What's the name of it? They make iPhones. They're from Taiwan or somewhere. I forget the name. Oh, Foxconn. People have said to me, "Oh, get a job at Foxconn. That'll be great." You know, you get a job in the factory, you'll make this much. And it's like, I don't want to build iPhones. That would not interest. That would just like suck the soul right out of me. You know. Oh, but the money's good. The money's good. What, money's more important than your happiness? Are you kidding me? I've just heard that from so many people. Oh, you know, this company's hiring, that company's hiring. Hey, you could be a truck driver. They make a lot of money. Oh my God, being a truck driver for me would be like torture. You know, if I drive like 3 hours, I want to get out of the car. Like, I don't even want to drive 3 hours at a time. Why would I be a truck driver and drive 8 to 10 hours a day or more? So, you know, don't get into this. No, yeah, you know, don't try to pigeonhole your kids into what you think they should do. Find out what they want to do, what they're interested in, and then see how you can help them turn that into a career. Now, you know, not everybody is going to be able to do what they want right off the bat, but you can push your kids in the right direction, that's for sure. And please do not recommend to people, like people have been recommending to me, hey, you should work here, you should work there. Don't say that. Ask the person, what do you want to do? What do you think you'd like to do? You know, if it was a perfect world, how would you like to make money? Those are awesome questions, right? Okay. And one of the last things I would tell my kids or help my kids figure out is, and this is a tough one. This is a tough one. You somehow want to instill the belief in your kids that they should always strive to be better and to improve themselves. And I think for this one, you simply need to be a good example for your kids. You need to be a good example. You know, my Japanese father-in-law, the one I wrote the ninja book about, a very accomplished guy, you know, very, very accomplished person. And he always said to me, the fastest way to teach your kids is to let them watch. How does it go? In Japanese, he would say that the fastest way to teach your kids something is to let them watch you do it. And he actually said, let your kids observe your back, which means, you know, watching you doing that thing. If you want your kids to be good at something, let them watch you do it, right? Which means setting an example, in my opinion. You know, you've got to show your kids, hey, I'm doing this. This is how you do it. And if you provide a good example, that will become normal for them. You'd be surprised all the weird habits and idiosyncrasies people have only because they observed their parents do these things for years and years and years, and then that just became normal. And then when they got out in life, they didn't know why they did it. And then when things go haywire, they think, my God, why am I doing this? They don't realize it came from their parents. Just from them observing their parents and unconsciously thinking, oh, this is how it should be. So, you know, so as a parent, that puts some pressure on you, right? You got to up your game a little bit. You know, you got to be a good example to your kids. And I'm not even going to get into the issue if you have if you're a drug user or you're an alcoholic or you're violent or whatever, like, man, you're a lost cause. You need help, you know, get help. Don't pass that kind of stuff on to your kids. Like, that's the worst. But for most normal people, and I know normal, that's, you know, what is normal, right? But you know what I'm talking about. Most people who think they have, if you think you have a pretty stable family life, it may not be as good as you think, but it's on the right track, right? So, you know, be a good example for your kids and show them that, hey, you know, I'm always trying to be better and improve myself, and that's what you should do too. Okay, so I hope this was helpful. As I said, I'm thinking about all this stuff for the last 8 months because my son's 18, and I've been wondering, have I prepared him well for life? You know, because he's got hopes and dreams, and he's working on a few things now to move out of the house. And I've told my, in America, I remember when I was a kid, like you're 18 years old, like get your ass out. Either you pay rent, if you stay home, you pay rent, or you get your ass out, whether you're going to college or whatnot. I'm not doing that to my kids, just because I think we don't prepare our kids for society at all. We just don't prepare them correctly. It's like you let your kids, they're in high school, kind of in fantasy land, right? In this little microcosm of their high school. And if you're lucky, your kids have kind of figured things out. They're popular, they're good at sports or whatever, they get good grades, they got a lot of friends, and they're in this safe little microcosm. And then they graduate from high school, boom. Maybe you give them the summer to just chill out, and you say, okay, you got the summer to figure out what you want to do now. And maybe they're going to college, maybe they're not, maybe they're going to the military, who knows. But everything was fine up until graduation day. Was like this fantasy world for them, and then boom, now reality hits the next day, and it's like, wait a second, why do we do that? Why do we raise our kids that way? We should be doing things, from the time they're pretty young to prepare them. It's a transition. It's not just a boom, black and white, black and white. It was this, now it's this. It shouldn't be like that. It should be like an organic transition, right? But it's not. So I think we really have to change the way we raise our kids and how we prepare our kids for life. Now, that also gets me thinking about in the past, trying to think, maybe go back to 150 years ago. Think about 150 years ago. In America, I want to say 90-some% of the population worked for themselves. And there were like apprenticeship programs for some jobs, right? So when your kids got to be a certain age, way, way, way back then, 150 years ago, maybe by the time your kid was 8 or 9, they had a job. They had like an apprenticeship. They were, you found somewhere that you could get them in. Maybe they were a stonemason or a blacksmith or something. You put them in there, and they worked with that person learning that trade, right? And we might think, now today in 2020, we might think, oh, that was a terrible system. No, I don't think so. I don't think it was. Because you look at kids now, what are they doing most of the time? A lot of kids just sit around playing video games, looking at their phones or their smartphones, or their computers. There's a lot of wasted time, in my opinion, just from what I've seen. Now, I've been a teacher for years and years and years and years, so I get to see a lot of this. I get to talk to a lot of people. And I just think to myself, that wasn't a bad way to do things. Because your kids got out, they met other people in this apprenticeship or whatever, or wherever they were put, They learned a trade. They learned how to make money, That was the goal back then. Just think about it. Kid's 8 or 9. Okay, he's got to learn a trade because he's got to support himself, right? And if we had a mindset closer to that today, we would really be helping our kids out a lot, I think. And, and the other thing, which I've talked about maybe in other videos, you've heard it or haven't heard it, is that, we think we're so advanced and modern these days, but if you go back to the 1920s and the 1930s in America, the 1920s and 1930s, so now we're talking about 90 to 100 years ago, there was child labor. There was still child labor. Kids actually went out and got jobs at like the age of 6, 7, 8 years old. My grandfather was 7 years old. His first job was pushing a coal cart, selling coal around the city. Why? Because his dad passed away and his mom was having a tough time. She had something, to where she couldn't work enough to make ends meet. So what happened, my grandpa and his older brother, who was probably like 10, they had to get out and get jobs. Like, hey, life is tough, 7 years old, sorry man, you're not going to second grade. You got to get out and work. That's how it was. And I've, living in Japan, I've heard even more horrible stories than that about Japan in those days. In Japan, up until World War II, in some areas of the country, well, even after World War II, but I won't go into that in detail, up until the war, in some parts of Japan, they sold their daughters into prostitution, or sold their daughters as like a slave or a maid or something. I mean, people put all kinds of different names on it to make it sound good, but most of these girls were sold into prostitution. Girls. That was just before the war. That was like 70 years ago, 70, 80 years ago. That was happening here in Japan. And living in Malaysia, I found a lot of stuff about Malaysia. Malaysians had it just as bad or worse than Japan did. And there are parts of Southeast Asia now where that child labor, that's just a fact of life. Kids are working. Kids are put into prostitution. We think we're in this modern world where we have, most of the major problems worked out, other than global warming and whatever. No, we still have this stuff going on, people. It's still going on. So there's a lot to think about, right? A lot to think about. And that's one of the other things, now that I'm talking about it, is I wanted to give my kids an education in life, which is why we moved around a little bit to a few countries, because I wanted them to see not everything is rosy. If you live in America your whole life, you think the rest of the world is that way. Oh man, you're sadly mistaken. You're sadly mistaken. There's a lot of countries out there where people have it really, really tough. And I wanted my kids to understand that, hey, they've got a great life. Like, they hit the jackpot. They hit the lottery being born to my wife and I, because my wife's Japanese, I'm American. Both countries are quite stable. They have Japan's a very peaceful, safe country. America, some parts I think are pretty safe and peaceful. Other parts are a little dangerous maybe. But all in all, compared to other countries in the world, we've got a lot going for us, right? Japan and America has a lot going for it compared to other countries. You could be born into some really horrible countries. So I told my kids, you guys hit the lottery, man. You really hit the lottery. And I want them to be appreciative for what they have and the situation they have. But I also want them to know that, wow, there are places in the world that are pretty rough. People have tough times. And that's also a part of life. People talk about, the average person in the world makes $2 a day. And in America you think, what? $2 a day? I make more than that in 1 hour. Yeah, because you're in America. But I've been to the places where people make $2 a day. I've been places where people make less than $1 a day. And let me tell you, their outlook on life is a lot different than it is in America. And interestingly enough, they're probably happier than most Americans are. I've been out in the jungles and in Malaysia and Indonesia and met people without even a pot to piss in. Maybe they had a few dollars to their name. Literally, the money in their pocket was all the money they had. And they met me and told me I was the first American they had ever met before. And they wanted to just sit and have a cup of coffee with me and talk. And they bought me a cup of coffee with their last like $2 in their pocket. I've been places like that where people have done that for me. I've gone to like a school in the middle of nowhere, in Indonesia, and people found out I was, a teacher from America's here. Like a bunch of people from the village came out to see me. They brought food. They brought food for me to eat, and I know these people don't have anything, but they brought the best stuff they had just so that I could have a good impression of them. How many people do you know in America or Europe who would do that? Who would take the best food that they had in their house, or take the money, all of their money, and go out and buy the best thing they could and bring it to you just because they want to have a good impression and they want to sit and have a chat with you over a cup of coffee or a nice meal just to see what your life is like. pretty rare in the Western world. But I had those experiences, and I'm really appreciative and grateful for having those experiences, because it changed my outlook on life and how, I've always treated people well, but now I look at people with different eyes than I used to, right? So that was an important thing I felt for my kids to see themselves, like, hey, there are people in the world who live like this. What do you think about that? And my kids have also been places with me where people have come out and done this. And maybe my kids didn't think too much about getting a glass of mango juice and some chicken curry from someone. Although, afterwards they said to them, like, that's all that person had. And they shared it with the 5 of us. That person, they're only eating once a day, and they gave us that much food. Don't ever forget that. That's true generosity, right? So those are the kind of lessons I wanted my kids to learn. Okay, lots of food for thought here. I'm calling this a coffee talk because if we were sitting together having a cup of coffee, this is what I would have talked about today, right? I'm sitting here by myself. My wife and kids are out of the house, and I've met all my friends the last few days. So I'm just sitting here kind of reflecting on life and thinking, yeah, this is a strange thing. We don't really prepare our kids appropriately for life, in my opinion. So what do you think about that? Leave any questions or comments you have. I'd love to hear them. Okay, you guys, take care.